I've covered how to secure your operating systems in several different videos, by first showing you what OSs are more secure as a base foundation, and then how to further harden and optimize them. But optimizing the privacy and security of your operating system isn't very useful if you have security holes at the network layer. If something like your Wi-Fi network is not secure, it takes very little effort for somebody to hack into it and do something that'll get the party van sent to your house. And this is just the capability of any old script kiddie that is feeling bored and has nothing else better to do. Don't even get me started on the types of things that a glow boy could do. So I'm going to start with the basics. I know most of these things that I'll cover at first, my subscribers probably already know because y'all are wicked smart, but there's a lot of noobs out there who will see this video as well, and it's also good to help them out. You see, when it comes to cybersecurity, there's this concept called herd immunity, which pretty much follows the same ideas that we see with herd immunity in virology. If somebody's technology is not secure, like say, a girl that you met at the park, you're putting yourself at risk when she takes you back to her apartment for Bible study and you connect to her Wi-Fi, because the spooks in her network will spread into your devices, and then the next step is, of course, the party van coming to pick you up. So be sure to share this video and lend a hand to the more tech illiterate if you're feeling like a good Samaritan. So the first step to securing your network is to, of course, use a strong password on all of your wireless channels. This might seem like a no-brainer, but shockingly, a high number of people's personal Wi-Fi networks have no security on them at all, or they'll do something almost as ridiculous, like making the password the same as the SSID, aka the network name, or they'll make it a simple permutation of the network name. It's also important to pick a password that isn't really a word. One of the most common types of attacks to all passwords, regardless of what they are or what they're securing, is a dictionary attack. To put it simply, someone can use a hacking program like aircrackng along with a dictionary of predefined words and phrases that are most commonly used as passwords. And oftentimes, these are taken from database dumps in previous hacks of websites or email services, so they really are real-life passwords that people are using. And in some instances, aircrackng can try up to 80,000 keys per second, more words than most human beings can actually remember. So if your Wi-Fi password contains words or phrases that would commonly come up or be used by other people, chances are it's already in one of the many password dictionaries that are online. Your passwords also shouldn't be something that is comprised of personally identifying information, because this data is very easy for somebody like a neighbor to figure out. If your password were, for example, your birthday written in long form, you might think that it's a secure password if you write out the month and the year and the date using a combination of letters and numbers. But when you tie a balloon to your mailbox, now the entire neighborhood knows when your birthday date is, and all it takes is that neighbor to walk by, ask how old you are today, and then once you give them the answer, you've essentially given them your Wi-Fi password. Personally, for my Wi-Fi network, I use a pseudo-random 20-character password that is comprised of upper and lower alphanumeric characters as well as symbols. It's too complex even for me to remember, which is why I use a password manager. I've got a video on password managers, by the way, which you should definitely watch if you want to learn more about them. I think that this is a great approach, since most users add new devices to their users don't really add devices to their network that often. Sure, it might take a minute or two to enter the password on a device, but this is an annoyance that you'll only really have to deal with a couple times a year or whenever you buy a new device that you're going to connect to the network. Now, I mentioned securing both of the Wi-Fi channels, so let me get into specifics about that. Most routers will give out a wireless signal on multiple frequencies. A 5 gigahertz frequency, which is generally faster and has a shorter range, and a 2.4 gigahertz frequency, which is typically a little bit slower and has a longer range. On most routers, you have the ability to set different passwords for these different channels or different frequencies. So it's important to make sure that both of the frequencies are secured with a strong password. On a side note, if you share your network with other people, you could put a password onto the 5 gigahertz frequency that only you know. And since that's generally the faster channel of your Wi-Fi, you could have the faster internet reserved all for yourself, while everybody else has to use the 2.4 gigahertz pleb frequency. Finally, on the subject of passwords, it's extremely important to change the default admin password to log into your router. This is one of the biggest things that people miss, and I've lost track of how many times that I've gone to public coffee shops, restaurants, and barbershops that have free Wi-Fi, which is secured with a good password. Oftentimes you even have to ask one of the employees there for the password, but then it has an unsecured admin console. If somebody were to log into your router as an administrator, they effectively have full control over the network and could even cause physical damage to the router by doing something like flashing a corrupted firmware update or simply interrupting a legitimate firmware update, which will brick your router and frustrate your employees because now they can't use Snapchat on your Wi-Fi anymore. Now, to secure all of these things, you obviously have to log into your router with its IP address, aka the default gateway. To do that, you first need to get the IP address of your default gateway. On Linux, you can type route-n into a terminal to get your gateway IP, or in Windows, like you see here, you can open the command prompt and type ipconfig to get the default gateway address. These steps might not even be necessary for you though, since most home networks are either in the 192.168 range or they are in the 10.0 range. So in either case, your gateway address should be 192.168.0.1 or 10.0.0.1 respectively. Once you have this address, type it into your browser's URL bar. It's not necessary to put HTTP before it. Your browser should autofill that for you. And you'll get a login prompt to access the admin console of the router. The username is going to be admin, typically all lowercase, and the password will be written on the sticker that came with your router. Alternatively, you could Google the default password for your router, since many of these routers have the same default password with this information online, which is also why, again, it's very critical to change it because anybody can just look up admin password for insert the model of your router here, and then they can log into it and start wreaking havoc. From here, you can start securing the Wi-Fi password and also change the admin password to something that's difficult to crack. Again, I recommend using pseudo-random passwords that are 12 characters or more, and then storing them in a password manager that has a secure master password. Now, a strong password is useless if it is being sent in the clear. So you should use a strong encryption on your router, such as WPA2 or WPA3. If your router doesn't have WPA2 or newer, then it's time to get a new router. WPA2 has been certified for over 10 years, and WPA3 is starting to make its way into consumer routers and devices. It's also a good idea to change your Wi-Fi name to something more generic. Giving it a name like your house number or your personal name is not a good idea, and it makes it easier to identify which network is yours, and then obviously your enemies are going to come and try to do things to mess with it. This isn't foolproof though, because somebody can always use a tool to read the strength of your wireless signal to pinpoint exactly what house your router is in. But a good SSID will mitigate threats who aren't intelligent enough to do this. And then finally, for your home network, if you're using an older router, you may have a feature enabled on it called WPS. This is a feature that enables you to easily sync devices like a printer to your network by pressing the WPS button on the router and then pressing it on the printer. And the reason that you shouldn't use WPS is twofold. When the button is pressed, any device that's within the range with WPS enabled could then be synced onto the network, which is one path of infiltration for a hacker. Now, this is obviously kind of hard to pull off because a hacker would have to try to connect within the few seconds of you pressing the button. However, there is a more sinister drawback to WPS that makes it very insecure. It uses an 8-digit PIN as a fallback for the connection. And to make matters worse, the implementation of WPS checks this 8-digit PIN in 2 separate 4-digit segments. So instead of the possible key space of this PIN being 100 million possible combinations, it's only 20,000 combinations. A piece of cake for a hacker that has any type of script to crack the password. So if your router does support WPS, you should disable it while you are inside of the admin console and connect devices like your printer with a password or an Ethernet cable instead of WPS. It may also be a good idea for you to enable a firewall, depending on what operating system you're using. A good OS like Linux and OpenBSD doesn't actually have any TCP or UDP ports open by default. So there's not really much of a reason to use a firewall on these. Of course, if you're using one of these systems as a server, then a good firewall is necessary since you'll have some ports open to serve the public with whatever service your server has on it. A good firewall tool for Linux, if you're interested, is GUFW. If you're running a dumpster fire OS like Windows though, it's going to be very important to make sure that your firewall rules are configured properly, your system is up to date, and your antivirus is paid for. And even then, you're still not going to be secure because at the end of the day, you're using Windows. Now that your home network is secure, you may be wondering, what do I do when I need to connect to a network whose security is unknown? Well, the first thing that I would recommend is to either use Tor or a VPN. Both of these options will encrypt all the communications that your device makes over the sketchy network. Tor is probably the best option here because I've noticed that at some airports, they will block certain VPN connections. And this is actually pretty easy for them to do because all VPN servers are public facing, so it's easy to block connections to their IP addresses from the airport or coffee shop or whatever type of network you're on. With Tor, however, you can connect with a bridge connection, which makes it practically impossible for them to block you from connecting to the Tor network. Finally, you should also take some time to make sure that your web traffic is encrypted. You can do this with an add-on called HTTPS Everywhere, and it's also worth encrypting your DNS traffic. I won't really go too far into how to do that though, because I've already made an entire video on my channel that's dedicated to showing you how to do that specific thing. You should check that out if you're interested in encrypting your DNS traffic as well. Once you've done all these things, then your network is hardened. Make sure to share this video so that other people can have their network secured as well. Remember, the herd mentality or the herd immunity rather, is very important. And also, leave a like, subscribe, and comment below to let me know if you have any other tips for securing your network. See you next time, guys.